This is Solus 3 with the budgie desktop. I've installed it on an external hard drive. I'm happy to say that this time Simple Screen Recorder works with the budgie desktop on Solus. It didn't work for me with Solus 2. The installation was fairly straightforward. I didn't have any trouble getting it installed on an external drive and getting the grub bootloader on the external drive. The only thing I want to warn you about in advance is that the installer does not contain any utility for making new partitions within the installer. It will mount existing partitions, so if you're going to use a new partition, create that with gparted before you go into the installer. And there is a version of gparted available in the live session. This is not the default wallpaper. If you right-click on the desktop, you can click on Change Background. And if you click on Background, you'll get a series of wallpapers. This is obviously the one I'm using. This was the default. I hate to be negative, but I really don't like this wallpaper. However, I would never choose or reject a Linux distribution based on the wallpaper, because it's easy to get new wallpapers from Google Images or a variety of other places. If I hadn't found a wallpaper I preferred within their regular selection, I would have found one somewhere else. So I'm going back. Selecting the one I like better. Budgie still uses the brisk menu, which is known for being very fast. Going to Office, LibreOffice Writer. By the way, I've disabled animations, so it's even faster than the way it comes. Takes a while for LibreOffice to load, however. To tell you the truth, I'm not wild about these icons in LibreOffice, but those could be changed also. Now this is version 5.4.03, which is close to the latest version and a little more advanced than the version you'll find in some other recent distributions. One reason for this is that Budgie uses its own repositories and its own software management system. It doesn't depend on the Ubuntu repositories, which in turn depend on the Debian repositories and therefore take a long time to get up to date. It doesn't depend on the Fedora repositories. So a lot of the software is quite recent. However, the drawback is that there's a limitation on the amount of software available in the repositories. In my experience, it is growing, and I was able to find everything I normally use. Unusual programs such as MuseScore and LibreCAD. The only one I normally use that I wasn't able to find was PyRenamer, which I use for renaming JPEG files using the time and date metadata in the file. Now there's still a side panel called the Raven panel, and you get to it by clicking on this little icon on the lower right. But it doesn't really do much anymore. It used to have a lot of settings. It doesn't really have very many settings anymore. It has the calendar applet and it has sound control. It does show a little bit about my microphone. Then it has notifications, and there are none here. But aside from that, it doesn't do very much. It's not much more than a glorified GNOME 3 panel, but that usually sticks to the uprightness, goes the whole length of the display. If you click on this symbol here, you get to settings, but the settings are over here in their own little box. And that's not necessarily the fastest way to get to settings. As a matter of fact, I put a settings icon on the panel here, and it's a much faster way to get to the same thing. These settings are all right as far as they go, but they don't cover very much. There are all sorts of other settings that aren't included in this, and one of my gripes is that you have to look for settings all over the place in a number of distributions, not only this one. I wish somebody, and a few distributions have, put almost all of the settings in one place. I think they should continue to work on that. Anyway, here's style, widgets. I don't think these are... There it goes. Takes a while to adjust. That's adapt noch to. First one was adapt. This is adapt eta. Adapt noch to eta. And there are more. There's add weight dark. There's the default, which wasn't the default, by the way. And that's this one. The default was adapter. Under icons, it has papyrus. And they're fairly attractive icons. The only gripe I have here is that the same icon can be used for 2 or more different applications. So you can't tell much by looking at the icon. For instance, this is the icon for Rhythmbox music player, but it's also the icon for sound, and here's the icon for settings, but it shows up here when I have the budgie settings, and it shows up when I have some settings which are not even included in the budgie settings. I'd like to see a few more distinct icons. Anyway, there are different choices here too. Papyrus dark. If they've changed, I haven't noticed. Papyrus light. Some of these differences are rather subtle, going to Adwaita. Those are quite different, as you can see. But I'm going to stick with papyrus. Now I'm using the built-in theme now. If I turn on this little switch, I can enable the dark theme. And there's the dark theme. I like that, but I'm going to leave it the way it was. It takes a while for that switch to respond. And if I turn this on, it will default to the built-in theme, which was the non-dark theme. Now you notice I have turned animations off, and I prefer to do that because I believe it'll help Simple Screen Recorder a bit. But I also like a little snappier performance, and I don't care for animations in general. But if you want them, here they are. Now, as I said, this isn't all of the settings. There are lots more settings. They just aren't in the settings window. Just to take a look at the brisk menu for a minute. Under Accessories, there's a calculator, Files, and a Gedit text editor. Under Graphics, there's LibreOffice Draw. Under Internet, there's Firefox, HexChat, Mozilla Thunderbird, and Transmission. By the way, Firefox is version 55. Now, Firefox, again, it takes a while to load. Firefox updates itself for most Linux distributions. Version 55.0.1. But this is more up to date than I currently have in my Ubuntu-based distribution, which is still on version 54. Going to Office, you've got the calendar. And this is a calendar which actually allows you to do things rather than just look at the date. You can enter details. And there are different categories. And as I said, you have the entire LibreOffice suite, really up-to-date version. Under Sound and Video, you have GNOME MPV Player, which works very well. I would probably install VLC, which is available, but this works quite well, and it was able to play all the videos I made. You have Rhythmbox Music Player, and I installed Simple Screen Recorder from their repositories with no difficulty whatsoever. Then under Sundry, you have iBus Preferences and Print Settings. Under Systems, you have quite a few things, some of which are available elsewhere, but some of which are not available elsewhere. So you have background, Bluetooth. By the way, I have disabled Bluetooth because I don't use it. Color, date and time, details, display, hardware drivers. By the way, I have an Intel driver that I usually use for my central processing unit, and it isn't available in Solus budgie, but it is available in Ubuntu, for instance. Keyboard, mouse and touchpad, network, notifications, online accounts, and because the brisk menu is not expandable, you have to scroll down. Power, I've used that to disable all the power saving settings, as I usually do, because I don't like having my computer turn off every 2 minutes. Printers, I'll get back to that. Privacy, region and language, search, sharing, the software center, I'll get to that in detail. Sound, which I'm using, universal access, accessibility, users, and Wacom tablet. Then under System Tools, you have the budgie desktop settings, which was that previous settings window which I showed you, the dconf editor, gparted partition editor, which I mentioned, and then you have settings, which is different apparently from budget desktop settings, but it has the same icon. Let's see. There's what it calls budgie desktop settings. And there's settings, which are different, but it has the same icon. And then there's the terminal. Under Universal Access, you have Onboard, which is a display keyboard. Then under Utilities, you have the Archive Manager, Disk Usage Analyzer, Disks, which is GNOME Disks, Document Viewer, which is a PDF viewer, Help, the Image Viewer, Passwords and Keys, Screenshot, and System Monitor. Then under Other, you have Onboard Settings, which apparently is not quite the same as Onboard, which you find under Universal Access. So under Other, you have Onboard Settings. Now, as you can see, there is also a search feature here. You don't actually have to be in it. You can be anywhere down here. And if you start typing, CA, there's the calculator, the calendar, etc. That's a useful feature which every menu should have, some still don't. Now, regarding printers, I couldn't show you this while I was recording this video because I don't have enough USB slots to connect my printer, and also the external drive, and also the USB microphone. However, Solus recognized one of my printers, but not the other. The printer that it did not recognize works very well with other Linux distributions, but it has drivers for the deb format used by Ubuntu and Debian, and it has drivers for the RPM format used by Fedora and others. It does not have any drivers for the unique budgie software system, and that's another one of the drawbacks of these unique systems. Budgie does have a lot of printer drivers available, just not for one of my printers. I want to point out that open windows show up as little icons with a little dot beneath them. And this to me is completely useless. So I'm going to make some changes. Right-clicking on the panel doesn't get you anywhere. But if you go to the budgie settings, go to bottom panel, and then settings, position. Now I'm going to move that to the top. Now I'm going to click on create new panel, and it asks me top or bottom. I'm going to click on bottom panel. If I go over here to settings, it says the position is at the bottom. So I'm going back to applets. I'm going to click on add applet. Now you notice there's an icon task list. That's what I already have on the other panel. Here's a regular task list. So I'm going to show that. Click on Add. Notice down here it says Simple Screen Recorder, Budgie Settings, etc. That's the kind of task list I prefer. However, the reason for keeping the other one at the top is that when you open an application, suppose you want to add something to the panel. I'm going to click on Accessories and then Calculator. Now, the calculator shows up here as text at the bottom. When I right-click on that, it allows me to move to another workspace, but it doesn't allow me to add it to the panel. When I right-click on this little icon on the top, it allows me to pin it to the panel. So I'm going to do that. Now when I close the calculator, the icon is still on the panel and I can open it again. So while I prefer the text-based window list, it's a good idea to leave the icon-based list in place also. Now if I run top, it shows about 800 megabytes of random access memory being used. It was around 700 with just the desktop. That's a lot lower than with GNOME 3, and that may be its primary advantage. So would I use it? Well, unfortunately it doesn't support one of my printers. It probably does not support one of my scanners, and it doesn't have all of the software that I normally use, so I couldn't use this. But it's progressing, and it's a very nice desktop for what it does do, so perhaps in time I would be able to use it. This is XRAM Tech. Thanks for watching.